Caitlin Clark fans ready to send Bud Light level boycott. The full story. It's the middle of summer. The arena is packed. 60,000 people watching a basketball game between two women's teams. Not because of some special event. Not because of some gimmick. Just because one woman, one single human being, stepped onto a professional basketball court, pulled up from 30 feet away like it was nothing, and drained it. The crowd loses its mind. And somewhere in the back of the league's offices, someone is running the numbers and realizing that this one player, this 22-year-old kid from Des Moines, Iowa, is personally responsible for more than a quarter of every single dollar the entire WNBA makes. One player, 26.5% of everything. Now imagine the same league, the one that desperately needed her, the one that was quietly fading before she showed up, deciding to do things that make her fans so furious, so absolutely fed up, that they start talking about destroying it the same way Bud Light got destroyed. That's where we are right now. And I want you to understand something before we dive into the story. This is not a small thing. This is not a bunch of people on the internet being dramatic. What is happening right now in the WNBA is one of the most fascinating, explosive, and genuinely dangerous situations any professional sports league has ever walked itself into. Because one side has all the leverage. And it's not the league. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about who Caitlin Clark actually is, how she changed everything, and why right now, at this very moment, a movement is building that could shake the WNBA to its foundation. Caitlin Elizabeth Clark was born on January 22, 2002, in Des Moines, Iowa. If you know anything about Des Moines, you know it is not exactly the center of the sports universe. Iowa is corn. Iowa is quiet. Iowa is not the kind of place where you go looking for a generational talent who will one day rewrite the record books of American basketball. But that's exactly where she came from. She grew up watching the game, falling in love with it, shooting around in the driveway, perfecting a stroke that, by the time she was a teenager, was already something coaches had never quite seen before. She had this combination, this almost reckless confidence from deep range combined with an absolutely surgical ability to pass the ball, that made you stop and watch. That made you say, wait, who is this kid? She committed to the University of Iowa. And what happened over the next 4 years wasn't just a successful college career. It wasn't just a really good player at a Big Ten school. What Caitlin Clark did at Iowa was one of the most remarkable athletic achievements in the history of American sports, men's or women's, doesn't matter, either one. In her freshman year, she led all of NCAA Division I in scoring. As a sophomore, she became the first women's player ever to lead Division I in both points and assists in the same season. Her junior year, she was the National Player of the Year, led Iowa to the national championship game, and was again leading the nation in scoring and assists. Her senior year, she did it all again. But here's the number that you need to sit with for a second. Pete Maravich. If you know basketball, you know that name. Pistol Pete. The man played for LSU in the late 1960s and early 1970s and scored so many points in 3 college seasons. Remember, there was no three-point line then, no shot clock working in his favor the way it does today, that his record of 3,667 career points had stood for over 50 years. Men and women combined. Nobody could touch it. On February 15, 2024, Caitlin Clark broke it. She didn't just barely pass it. She kept going. She finished her college career with 3,951 points. More than anyone, man or woman, in the history of NCAA Division I basketball. Shaquille O'Neal called her the best female collegiate player who ever lived. The Iowa House of Representatives unanimously passed a resolution declaring February 22 as Caitlin Clark Day in the state of Iowa. The University of Iowa retired her jersey number, only the 3rd player in program history to ever receive that honor. An autographed trading card with her face on it sold at auction for $78,000 in 2024. Then in 2025, a Clark rookie WNBA card sold for $366,000, surpassing Serena Williams to become the most expensive women's sports card in history. Later that year, another one sold for $660,000. $660,000 for a trading card. But as incredible as all of that is, none of it captured what Caitlin Clark really meant. None of it told the full story. To understand that, you had to watch her play. Because here is what she did that nobody else was doing. She wasn't just scoring from far away. She wasn't just making difficult shots. She was making shots that were so far out, so audacious, so absolutely disrespectful to the concept of defending her, that they looked like something from a different planet. She would catch the ball at half court, barely even set her feet, and let it fly with complete and total certainty. And it would go in. Again and again and again. But she wasn't just a scorer. That's what people who hadn't watched her closely enough missed. She could see the floor, like a chess grandmaster. She could thread passes through 3 defenders to a cutting teammate before the defender even knew what was happening. Her vision, her sense of timing, her ability to make every single player around her better. That was just as special as the shooting. She turned Iowa women's basketball into appointment television. Not just in Iowa, across the country. People who had never watched a women's basketball game in their lives were sitting down, pulling out the remote, and watching Caitlin Clark play basketball. She gave 6 different television networks their most watched women's basketball game ever. And then the 2024 WNBA draft happened. The Indiana Fever had the #1 overall pick. They had been one of the worst teams in the league for years, just 13 wins the season before. Languishing. Forgotten. A franchise in desperate need of something, anything, to breathe life back into it. They selected Caitlin Clark. The announcement sent shockwaves through the sports world. Not because it was a surprise, everybody knew she was going first, but because of what happened next. What happened in the weeks after the draft, and then in the months after she started playing, was something that the WNBA had never seen. Not in its nearly 30 years of existence. Tickets to Indiana Fever games became impossible to get. Other teams started moving their home games against Indiana out of their regular arenas and into the NBA arenas next door, bigger buildings that could hold more people, just to meet the demand. For different teams did this. Washington, Atlanta, Las Vegas, Los Angeles. They moved to bigger buildings, and it still wasn't enough. The regular season finale in Washington sold 20,711 tickets, a new record for any regular season WNBA game ever. Indiana's total home and road attendance for the year set a new all-time WNBA record at over 643,000 fans. The next closest team was more than 200,000 below them. The Fever had averaged about 4,000 fans per home game the year before. With Clark, they shot up to over 17,000. Jersey sales for the Indiana Fever went up by 1,193%. In 1 year, television ratings went through the roof. 6 networks, ESPN, ESPN2, ABC, CBS, ION, and NBA TV, all recorded their most-watched WNBA game in history during the 2024 season. When Clark and Angel Reese squared off on May 17th, 2.5 million people tuned in. The most viewers ever for a WNBA game on ESPN. Time magazine named her the 2024 Athlete of the Year. Forbes put her on the list of the world's 100 most powerful women. On the court, she was extraordinary. She averaged 19.2 points, 8.4 assists, and 5.7 rebounds per game. She set the WNBA single-season record for assists with 337. She set the WNBA single-season rookie record for points with 769. She set the WNBA single-season rookie record for three-pointers made with 122. She recorded the first triple-double by a WNBA rookie in history. She set the single-game assist record in the entire WNBA's history with 19 dimes in one game. As a rookie, she was named Rookie of the Year. She made the All-WNBA first team. She led the Fever to their first playoff appearance since 2016. Now here is the thing that makes all of this even more staggering. An economist at Indiana University, a finance professor named Brewer, who specializes in valuations, was asked to figure out just how much Caitlin Clark was worth to the WNBA. He found that she was personally responsible for 26.5% of all WNBA economic activity in 2024. Merchandise, ticket sales, television revenue. Every dollar the league made, she had her fingerprints on more than a quarter of it. He calculated her potential economic impact in 2025 at approximately $875 million. The Indiana Fever franchise itself, which had been valued at around $90 million the year before she arrived, was now worth closer to $340 million because of her. She also generated an estimated $41 million in economic impact for the city of Indianapolis alone, hotel bookings, restaurant visits, tourism dollars all surging on game days. And her salary? What was she getting paid for all of this? $76,535 for her rookie season. $76,000. Her Nike endorsement deal was reportedly worth $28 million over 8 years. She was making infinitely more from endorsements than from actually playing the sport. The WNBA salary structure, something players and fans have complained about for years, meant that the woman responsible for nearly 30% of the entire league's economy was being paid what amounts to a decent entry-level salary at a tech company. But none of that is the story we're here to talk about today. The story we're here to talk about is what happened next. What happened when the fans who loved Caitlin Clark, who showed up in massive numbers, who drove the ratings, who bought the jerseys, who made the WNBA relevant in a way it had never been before, started to get angry. Really, truly angry. You need to understand something about Caitlin Clark's fan base. These are not casual sports fans. These are not people who just stumbled into women's basketball. The majority of the people who fell in love with Caitlin Clark at Iowa and then followed her to the WNBA are people who were drawn to her specifically, her style of play, her personality, her story. Many of them were brand new to watching women's basketball entirely. She brought them in. She was the door. And from the very beginning of her professional career, there was a pattern that her fans noticed. A pattern that made them uncomfortable. And then frustrated. And then, eventually, furious. The pattern was this. Caitlin Clark kept getting hit. Hard. In ways that didn't get called. And the people doing it often didn't face serious consequences. Let's walk through this. In 2024, during her rookie season, there was a moment that became one of the most talked about incidents in the WNBA's history. Chicago Sky's Chindi Carter hip-checked Clark off the ball, a deliberate, obvious, completely unprovoked shove, while play was happening elsewhere. No foul was called in real time. The league later upgraded it to a flagrant one. Carter was not suspended. Carter later made comments on social media that many interpreted as unapologetic, even mocking. That incident lit a match. Fans were enraged. Not just at Carter. At the league. At the officials. At the way it seemed like nobody was rushing to protect the player who was carrying the whole operation on her back. The social media conversation exploded. And it didn't go away. Then in 2025, there were more incidents. Marina Mabrey shoved Clark and later admitted it was wrong. More rough plays. More moments where fans felt the officiating was inconsistent, where Clark was getting called for things other players weren't, where physical contact against her wasn't being penalized the way it should be. And here's the thing about Caitlin Clark. She doesn't just absorb this quietly. She's competitive. She's passionate. She fires back. She gets into it with referees. She claps and yells and reacts. And because she is the most watched player in the league, every single one of those reactions is captured on camera and dissected by millions of people. Her coach at Indiana, Stephanie White, started speaking up, loudly. After one game, White said, "She is not called the same way everybody else is called." That line resonated. It spread. Fans took it and ran with it. By 2026, things were escalating. Clark was already racking up technical fouls in her third season. She got her 5th technical of the year for clapping, literally for clapping after a play she disagreed with. The officials told her it was for clapping and instigating. Clark's response in the press conference afterward was something that went viral immediately. She said, "It's ridiculous. I got a technical for clapping. We should all just go on the calendar now and pick a game I'm going to be suspended for if I'm going to get a technical for clapping." The crowd watching that clip went absolutely wild. Because it was funny. And also because it was frustrating. Because here was this woman who had been hit, shoved, and roughed up repeatedly, and somehow she was accumulating technicals at an alarming rate for expressing emotion. Fans started comparing notes. They pointed out that other players in the league routinely argued with officials and celebrated dramatically without getting techs. They looked at the numbers. They looked at the tape. And then came the incident that changed everything. June 22, 2026. The Indiana Fever hosted the Phoenix Mercury at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. The Fever won, 86-77. On paper, it was a good night for Indiana. But the scoreline wasn't what people were talking about. Not even close. During the game, in a chaotic sequence where both teams were scrambling for a loose ball, Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas was captured on camera pressing what appeared to be a closed fist into Caitlin Clark's throat. The officials reviewed the play. They did not call a foul. The game went on. That night, the clip spread across social media like wildfire. Millions of views. Millions of people watching a woman's fist connect with another woman's throat in a professional basketball game with no foul called and no stoppage of play. The reaction was explosive. Fans were not just angry. They were past angry. They were in a place that can only be described as collectively outraged. Comments flooded every social media platform. The WNBA's official accounts were flooded with replies, not about the game, not about any of the other incredible things that had happened that night, but about that one moment. That fist. That throat. That no call. The next day, the WNBA did act. They reviewed the play, upgraded it to a flagrant foul too, and suspended Alyssa Thomas for one game. One game. The fan reaction to that was arguably more intense than the reaction to the original incident. One game for a punch to the throat. One game for what the league itself called a non-basketball act. Are you going to do something about this? I hope she gets a lawyer and sues you. One fan wrote, directly tagging the WNBA. But 2 days later, it happened again. The Fever and Mercury played again on June 25th. And Clark, already dealing with the residue of a chaotic week, was hit again. Coach Stephanie White was apoplectic in the post-game press conference. Number 1, you've got to call it, White said. It's absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. And then number 2, you're coming in here aware of what happened 2 nights ago, and that still happens. Absolutely unacceptable. The reckless closeout that they actually reviewed, the foot still comes down on top of the defender's foot that wasn't upgraded. Absolutely disrespectful. We have a generational talent and WNBA superstar who had 2 cheap shots right there that weren't called, and I just say again, absolutely unacceptable. Clark herself exited in the second half with a back injury after the second game. And then the boycott talk went from background noise to front page. The word started appearing everywhere. Boycott. Not as a whisper. Not as a hypothetical. As an active call to action. On Twitter. On Instagram. On YouTube. In comment sections. In group chats. On podcasts. In sports bars. Boycott the WNBA and let the sponsors and TV executives feel the heat. Every Fever fan needs to boycott any game that doesn't include Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Send emails or tag their sponsors. The only way to create change is to hit them in their pocketbook. Boycott the WNBA. All fans should boycott this clown show and let them play in empty gyms. If she leaves, we leave. And that last one is the one that should genuinely terrify every executive in the WNBA right now. Because it's not just a threat. It's already demonstrably, provably, empirically true. We have the numbers, the receipts, the evidence. When Clark is injured and misses games, WNBA television ratings fall off a cliff. Not a little, a lot. One analyst looked at the data from her quad injury in May 2025 when she missed 5 games. The NBA TV games without Clark averaged 343,500 viewers, down 40% from comparable Fever games with her. 40%. Gone. Just because she wasn't on the court. Meanwhile, when she plays, the numbers are historic. In 2026, one game between the Fever and the Atlanta Dream averaged 816,000 viewers on Amazon Prime Video, the largest audience the streaming platform had seen for a WNBA game all season. A Fever versus Liberty matchup averaged 2.557 million viewers, making it the second most watched WNBA game on any network since the year 2000. Since 2000. 26 years. The Fever's game against the Toronto Tempo in June 2026 averaged 1 million viewers, and it was on the USA Network, a cable channel, not even a major broadcast network. ESPN and ABC were reserving bigger audience numbers for even bigger Clark matchups. And her absence is felt everywhere. Not just in television. In person. The second she's not playing, thousands of tickets that would have sold out in minutes suddenly remain available. Her fans don't just come to watch the Indiana Fever. They come to watch Caitlin Clark. And without her, the magic disappears. NBA analyst LaShawn McCoy, known as Qton Dime, made the stark assessment on a podcast in June 2026. Man, I'm not going to overreact over one little incident, but if you keep this stuff, there won't be no WNBA. What would they do? What would they do if Caitlin Clark said, "You know what? Today, I'm done with the WNBA." Where would the WNBA be? It would be over. He wasn't being melodramatic. He was doing math. The WNBA just signed an 11-year media rights deal worth a reported $2.2 billion, a deal that was almost certainly negotiated with Caitlin Clark's name, face, and drawing power as a major factor in the valuation. The league's entire trajectory, the expansion teams, the new arenas, the higher player salaries being negotiated, all of it depends on the continued growth of the sport. And the engine of that growth is one person. If the fans who came because of her go away, because of how she's being treated, the whole house of cards starts to tremble. Now, before we go any further, we need to have an honest conversation about boycotts. Because not all boycotts work. Most of them fizzle out in a week and leave no mark on anything. Sports fans threaten boycotts all the time. Teams make decisions fans hate. Trades happen. Coaches get fired. Rules change. Fans say they're done. They come back 2 weeks later. So, why is this one different? Why are people comparing this to Bud Light? Let's talk about Bud Light for a minute. Because the Bud Light story is genuinely one of the most stunning examples of consumer power in modern American history. And it is directly, explicitly the comparison that Caitlin Clark fans are making when they talk about what they want to do to the WNBA. In April 2023, Bud Light was the best-selling beer in the United States. It had held that title for over 2 decades. It was an American institution. You went to a barbecue, there was Bud Light in the cooler. You went to a baseball game, the guy in the row in front of you had a Bud Light. It was everywhere. Then the company partnered with a social media influencer named Dylan Mulvaney for a promotional campaign. Dylan Mulvaney is a transgender woman, and the campaign was designed to connect Bud Light with younger audiences and increase inclusivity. The conservative backlash was immediate, enormous, and sustained in a way that nobody, not even the most experienced brand managers at Anheuser-Busch, anticipated. Kid Rock filmed himself shooting cases of Bud Light with a gun. The video got 11 million views. Country singers pulled Anheuser-Busch products from their tour merchandise. Conservative politicians called for boycotts. The hashtag spread everywhere. And then people actually stopped buying it. Not just online. Not just in their words. In their wallets. In the first 3 months after the boycott started, Bud Light sales and purchase rates fell by approximately 28%. By the fourth quarter of 2023, sales and purchase incidents were down 32% compared to the year before. Revenue in the United States declined by 10.5% in a single quarter, primarily due to the collapse in Bud Light volume. Organic revenue in North America plunged by $1.4 billion in 2023. $1.4 billion. Gone. Because of a promotional video featuring one person. Bud Light lost its title as America's best-selling beer, a title it had held for more than 20 consecutive years, to a Mexican lager called Modelo Especial. And it happened in less than 6 weeks. A year later, the brand was still hemorrhaging. Sales were down. Some distributors reported taking as much as a 50% hit to their business. 500 independent distributors were affected. People were taking pay cuts. One distributor said the impact was really hurtful personally, and that they were considering retirement after absorbing a 30% reduction in income. The lesson of Bud Light is not just that boycotts can work. The lesson is that when a brand has a specific, deeply loyal core consumer base, and then does something that offends that core consumer base in a visceral, personal way, the damage can be permanent. Because those core customers don't just stop buying. They take it personally. They make it a statement. And they don't come back. Now, let's think about the WNBA. The WNBA has a core consumer base that it never had before Caitlin Clark. A massive, passionate, devoted following of fans who are there specifically because of one player. And those fans are watching that player get roughed up, get punched in the throat, have fouls not called on her behalf, get technical fouls for clapping, and generally not receive what they consider to be equitable treatment from the league that is cashing enormous checks generated by her existence. The comparison writes itself. And here is the terrifying part for the WNBA. Bud Light's core demographic was extremely large and broadly spread. The WNBA's Caitlin Clark fans are intensely concentrated. If they organize, if they move together, the impact would be felt immediately, dramatically, and in a way that would be almost impossible to hide. The empty seats would be visible on television. The rating drops would be immediate and measurable. The sponsor concerns would surface within weeks. Just when the flame of fan anger seemed like it might dim slightly, just when some people were saying, okay, the WNBA acted, Thomas was suspended, maybe things settled down, the league did something that threw gasoline directly onto the fire. On June 24, 2026, the WNBA released a commemorative poster to celebrate its 30th anniversary season. It featured 20 players, a mix of current stars and legendary alumni. Aya Wilson, Lisa Leslie, Angel Reese, Paige Buchers, Becky Hammon, Brianna Stewart, Dawn Staley, Cheryl Swoops, logos of all 23 teams that had ever played in the WNBA. It was a $29.99 collectible, a celebration of 30 years of history. Caitlin Clark was not on it. Let that sink in for a moment. The player who was personally responsible for generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the league. The player who had set multiple all-time records in her first season. The player who brought millions of new fans to women's basketball. The player who was averaging over 21 points and 8 assists per game in 2026 while leading the Fever to contention. The player who was the reason any of those new fans were even watching the WNBA in the first place. Not on the 30th anniversary poster. Sophie Cunningham, Clark's teammate, an excellent player, but not remotely close to Clark in terms of name recognition or historical significance, was on the poster to represent the Indiana Fever. Cunningham was there. Clark was not. The internet erupted. Fans who had already been angry were now incandescent. This league just continues to embarrass itself. Does it even register how absurd it is to exclude Caitlin Clark from this poster? How do you leave off the sole reason for the explosive growth of the league the past couple years? I'm assuming this is a parody post and not actually real, right? Because there's no way a serious organization would omit their most famous player of all time and the entire reason why people actually watch the WNBA now. The league got a golden goose and is doing everything they can to kill her. $40 for a WNBA poster without the face of the biggest star the WNBA had in all those 30 years? Yeah, I'm good. Sports media analyst Clay Travis of Outkick wrote on social media. The WNBA left Caitlin Clark off their 30th anniversary poster. We have truly never seen anything like this. The league got a golden goose and is doing everything they can to kill her. Now, to be fair, and we should be fair here because the truth matters, it was later revealed that the reason Clark wasn't on the poster was actually because of her own licensing agreements. Sports business analyst Darren Rovell explained that Clark's deals, other than with Nike, only allow licensees to use her name and number, not her likeness. The company that made the poster, Wingcraft, couldn't legally put her image on it without violating her licensing terms. So the exclusion wasn't malicious. It was contractual. But here's the thing. That explanation, while accurate, came after the damage was already done. For hours and hours, millions of people looked at that poster and saw yet another example of the WNBA failing to properly honor its most important player. The narrative was set. The outrage was real. And even after the explanation surfaced, plenty of fans said it didn't matter. The league should have figured out a way to work around those restrictions for something as important as a 30th anniversary celebration. They should have been proactive. They should have cared enough to solve the problem. And maybe they're right. Or maybe the licensing situation is genuinely complicated and the league did the best it could. Either way, the poster became one more log on the fire. Let's step back from the emotion for a moment. Because emotion is important, it's driving this whole story, but data is what makes the boycott threat credible. And the data here is genuinely extraordinary. When Clark plays, things happen. Big, measurable, economically significant things. The Fever vs. Liberty game in 2026 averaged 2.557 million viewers. That made it the second most watched WNBA game on any network since the year 2000. The year 2000. That's not a WNBA record from 2023 or 2024 or 2025. That's a record that goes back a quarter century. A game on USA Network, a cable channel, not ABC or ESPN or CBS, a cable channel, averaged 1 million viewers in June 2026 when Clark and the Fever played at home. That was the most watched WNBA game on cable or streaming all season at that point. On a cable channel, Prime Video, Amazon's streaming platform, was averaging 504,000 viewers for WNBA games in 2026. That represented Prime Video outpacing the linear networks by 33% among adults 18 to 34. The young audience that every media company desperately wants. Streaming that demographic. Because of what Caitlin Clark brought to the league. When she's injured and out, the numbers crater. A 40% drop in Fever viewership on NBA TV without her. The games still happen. The league still functions. But the financial reality is that a massive portion of the new audience that came to the WNBA because of Clark simply does not watch without her. Her rookie card sold for $660,000. An autographed Clark trading card from her college days sold for $78,000 just before she was drafted. These are not sports collectibles numbers. These are numbers you see for Michael Jordan, for LeBron James. These are once-in-a-generation collector numbers. And all of it, every single one of those metrics, is a direct indicator of how much leverage the Caitlin Clark fans actually have. Because here is the brutal reality of sports business. Television ratings determine advertising rates. Advertising rates determine media rights fees. Media rights fees are the primary source of income for professional sports leagues. If the ratings go down, the next TV deal is worth less. If the next TV deal is worth less, player salaries come down. Teams become less valuable. Arenas struggle to sell tickets. The WNBA just signed a historic media rights deal. But the value of that deal was based on projected, continued growth. Growth driven by Clark. If her fans walk away, even partially, even just for a season, the league's ability to meet those projections comes into serious doubt. That is what a Bud Light level boycott would do to the WNBA. Not destroy it, but damage it in a very real, very public, very quantifiable way. In a way that would force the league to confront exactly what it has and exactly what it is at risk of losing. Now, there is a question that hangs over all of this, and we'd be doing you a disservice if we didn't address it directly. Is the WNBA actually mistreating Caitlin Clark? Or are her fans seeing something that isn't there? This is where it gets complicated. Because the truth, as it usually does, lives somewhere in between the two extreme positions. On one side, you have people who believe, passionately and with evidence to back them up, that Clark is consistently not protected the way she should be. That officials let opponents get away with more against her than they would against other star players. That the league has been slow to act on incidents involving Clark. That there is a cultural tension within the WNBA about her fame and the attention it brings that manifests in ways that harm her physically on the court. Her own coach said, she is not called the same way everybody else is called. That's not just a fan on social media. That's the head coach of the Indiana Fever, who is in the building every single day. Sports analyst Sirat Sohi, who covers the WNBA for The Ringer and hosts their WNBA podcast, said that fans are starting to see a pattern where there have been cheap shots against Caitlin Clark that have gone uncalled. But Sohi also said something important. She said that refereeing issues are consistently bad across the WNBA. I don't think that the WNBA really has a standard for or a vision for how they want the game to look. They are very reactionary. She said that Clark is a magnifying glass to a lot of issues that have been plaguing the WNBA for a long time. A lot of mainstream sports fans are just now finding out about things that have bothered players for quite a while. In other words, the officiating problem is real, but it might not be specifically aimed at Clark. It might just be that she's the most watched, most scrutinized player in the league, so every bad call involving her gets amplified in a way that bad calls involving other players do not. There is also a second dimension to this story that is genuinely uncomfortable to talk about, but has to be acknowledged. Caitlin Clark is a straight white woman in a league that was built largely on the backs of black women, many of whom are openly LGBTQ. She arrived with enormous fame and brought an enormous new audience that, in some cases, directed hostility at the very players and traditions that define the league before she showed up. Some of the Caitlin Clark fanbase has, at times, made racist or homophobic comments directed at other WNBA players. That toxicity is real, and it is something the WNBA's existing fans and players have had to deal with. That context doesn't excuse rough play or bad officiating, but it does explain some of the cultural friction. It explains why some players and fans feel complicated about the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, even as they acknowledge her talent and her impact. The truth is messy. The truth usually is. But here's what is not in dispute. However you feel about the culture war dimensions of this story, the financial reality is clear. The WNBA needs Caitlin Clark. The WNBA needs Caitlin Clark's fans. And right now, those fans are angrier than they have ever been. NBA analyst Keaton Dime made a reference in his now famous podcast segment that deserves to be explored more deeply because it actually tells us a lot about what the WNBA should probably do. He referenced Michael Jordan. In the late 1980s, Michael Jordan was already the most exciting player in the NBA. He was filling arenas. He was drawing television audiences. He was changing the financial trajectory of the league. And he was also getting the living daylights beaten out of him every single night by the Detroit Pistons under a strategy so aggressive and so physical that it became known as the Jordan Rules. The Jordan Rules were a set of physical and psychological tactics that the bad boy Pistons used to try to contain Jordan. They hit him. They grabbed him. They fouled him hard. They tried to intimidate him into making mistakes. They essentially treated every possession involving Jordan as an opportunity to inflict as much legal, and sometimes borderline illegal, punishment as possible. For a while it worked, but the NBA saw what was happening to its most valuable asset. And over time, rules were tightened. Officiating adjustments were made. The league made it clear, not in writing, not as a formal policy, but in practice, that there were limits to how physically you could treat its marquee player. Jordan went on to win 6 championships. The league went on to experience its most explosive era of growth in history. Keaton Dime also mentioned Tom Brady and the NFL. Brady's devastating knee injury in 2008 prompted the NFL to enact what became known as the Brady Rule, new restrictions on hitting quarterbacks. The league had watched its most marketable player go down and realized it had to act. The parallel is obvious. The question is whether the WNBA is capable of the same self-awareness. Whether it can look at what is happening and say, we have a generational talent who is driving our growth. She's being treated in ways that put her at physical risk and are alienating her enormous fan base, and we need to do something real and substantial about it. Not just one-game suspensions. Not just retroactive reviews after the fact. Proactive, clear, consistent rules about protecting star players from unnecessary rough play. Dime put it bluntly, if Caitlin Clark keeps getting fouled like this, there won't be a WNBA. After the second Fever Mercury game on June 25, 2026, Caitlin Clark left the court in the second half with a back injury. She walked off gingerly. The cameras caught it. Millions of people watching on TV saw it. And then the internet did what the internet does. Fans had been furious before. Now, they were something past furious. Clark had just survived a week where she'd been punched in the throat, seen a one-game suspension handed down, gone back out the next game, been roughed up again, and then walked off the court hurt. Coach Stephanie White's furious post-game press conference, where she called the officiating absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful, was clipped and shared millions of times. By the next morning, June 27, 2026, the boycott movement was everywhere. Boycott the WNBA and let the sponsors and TV executives feel the heat. Every Fever fan needs to boycott any game that doesn't include Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. The only way to create change is to hit them in their pocketbook. It's gonna be less than half. I, for one, will not watch any game until Caitlyn is back. And then, in what might be the most important development of all of this, the news broke that thousands of tickets to the upcoming Indiana Fever game, scheduled for that Saturday against the Los Angeles Sparks, were still available. Thousands of tickets available for a Caitlyn Clark game. The Caitlyn Clark, whose tickets had been selling out in minutes since the day she was drafted. The Caitlyn Clark, whose games had prompted other teams to move into bigger buildings just to meet demand. Tickets still available. It might have been because fans had already heard she was going to miss the game due to the back injury. It might have been because it was a late-in-the-season game against a weaker opponent. There were legitimate explanations. But in the context of everything that had been happening, in the middle of a week where she'd been punched in the throat and walked off the floor hurt, the visual of thousands of unsold tickets for a Caitlyn Clark home game was absolutely devastating. Let them play in empty gyms, fans wrote. Until the WNBA learns to protect its greatest player, I'm not showing up and I'm not tuning in. Without CC22, the WNBA risks fading back into irrelevance. This is our moment to send a message. So let's talk about what this boycott would actually look like if it happened at scale. First, you have to understand who these fans are and how they engage with the WNBA. Unlike traditional sports fans, a huge percentage of Caitlyn Clark's fan base came to the WNBA specifically through her. They're not Indiana Fever lifers. They're not WNBA fans who happen to also like Clark. For millions of them, Clark is the reason they engage with the league at all. That means their relationship with the league is contingent, transactional in a specific way. They show up because of Clark. The moment Clark is not there, or the moment the league does something that makes watching feel like endorsing bad behavior, they have no strong reason to stay. The Bud Light boycott worked partly because the people boycotting it had easy substitutes. There were dozens of other beers. Modelo was right there. Coors Light was right there. The cost of switching was essentially zero. The same is true here. These fans don't have to watch WNBA games. They can watch highlights on YouTube. They can follow Clark's stats on their phone. They can watch when she comes back. They don't have to sit in arenas or tune into cable broadcasts or stream games on Prime Video. And sponsors notice ratings. They notice it immediately. A company paying for advertising on a WNBA broadcast is paying a rate based on expected viewership. If viewership drops 40% because Clark is sidelined, and we've seen that's exactly what happens, the ad rates for non-Clark games cannot be justified at the same level. Sponsors start having conversations with the league. Those conversations turn into renegotiations. Now imagine a coordinated, public, sustained campaign where Clark's fans, not because she's injured, but because they're making a deliberate choice, tune out of non-Fever games, stop going to non-Fever games, stop buying non-Fever merchandise, and start tagging sponsors in angry social media posts. The financial pressure would be real, immediate, undeniable. And here's the thing that the WNBA's leadership should be lying awake at night thinking about. The league's new media rights deal was signed on the expectation of growth. The league's expansion was announced on the expectation of growth. The Players' Union is negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement on the expectation of growth. If that growth stalls, if ratings plateau or decline, if ticket demand softens, if the buzz that has surrounded the league since 2024 starts to fade, all of those negotiations become much harder. The expansion teams become riskier. The players' salary demands become harder to meet. Everything that the WNBA has built, everything it has accomplished in the past 2 years, is built on a foundation that includes Caitlyn Clark's fans as a core pillar. Remove the pillar, and the structure shakes. Now, it wouldn't be fair to tell this story without acknowledging that not everyone agrees with the boycott movement. And some of the pushback is worth thinking about seriously. There are people within women's basketball, longtime fans, analysts, some players, who argue that the intense focus on Caitlyn Clark and her perceived mistreatment, while sometimes valid, has come at a significant cost to the rest of the league. They point out that every time something happens to Clark, it dominates the narrative so completely that genuinely incredible performances by other athletes go unnoticed. Aya Wilson, arguably one of the greatest players in WNBA history, continues to do extraordinary things every single night. Breanna Stewart is a Hall of Famer still playing at an elite level. Sabrina Ionescu, Nafisa Collier, players who have dedicated years to this league, who built it before Clark arrived, who are watching their accomplishments get swallowed by the Clark media machine. The WNBA's social media accounts, when they post about anything unrelated to Clark or the Fever, sometimes find their comment sections hijacked, the word reporters used, by fans who redirect the conversation back to Clark and the officiating controversy. Other players see this happen. Some of them have spoken about it, with varying degrees of diplomatic language. There is also a legitimate argument that the boycott threat, even if sincerely felt, could backfire. Boycotts that target the wrong people, that hurt independent arena workers, that cost jobs at concession stands and parking lots and local small businesses, often produce sympathy for the wrong side. The people who would feel a boycott first are not the executives making decisions. They're the working people whose livelihoods depend on fans showing up. And there are WNBA fans, genuine, longtime fans who loved this league before Clark arrived, who feel that the boycott threat is an attempt by a specific group of outsiders to hold the league hostage. To say, cater to us, protect our player, do what we want, or we'll burn it down. And they find that threat uncomfortable, even threatening. These voices matter. They're part of the story. But they don't change the fundamental reality of the numbers. They don't change the fact that the WNBA's current financial trajectory depends heavily on Clark's continued engagement and the continued loyalty of her fan base. Let's zoom out for a moment, because there's a bigger story here than just one player and one league. What is happening with Caitlin Clark and the WNBA is a fascinating case study in what happens when a phenomenon, a genuine, once-in-a-generation cultural phenomenon, arrives at an institution that wasn't ready for it. The WNBA is a league that has been fighting for survival, for respect, for attention, for decades. Its players have been paid wages that would embarrass most professional sports leagues. Its facilities have lagged behind. Its media coverage has been inconsistent at best and dismissive at worst. Its history of incredible athletes and moments has been chronically undervalued. And then Caitlin Clark arrived. And with her came an enormous wave of new fans, new money, new media interest, and new possibilities. But also new complications. Because those new fans didn't come in with the same history. They didn't come in knowing about Cheryl Swoops and Lisa Leslie and Diana Taurasi and the decades of incredible players who made this league what it is. Some of them, not all, but some, came in with attitudes and behaviors that felt disrespectful to the league's culture and history. The league's existing fan base had to absorb this. The league's existing players had to absorb this. And they didn't always do so gracefully. Some of the rough play against Clark might genuinely be a manifestation of that cultural friction. Players pushing back against what they perceive as an unfair power dynamic where one new player gets more attention and credit than veterans who spent years building the league. Does that make the rough play acceptable?
No.
Does it explain why some WNBA veterans and longtime fans feel conflicted about the Clark phenomenon?
Yes.
The WNBA is navigating something genuinely unprecedented. A player who is so big, so culturally significant, so financially impactful, that everything revolves around her, in a league where the whole ethos has always been about the collective, about teamwork, about the idea that no single player is bigger than the game. Clark herself, to her enormous credit, has never asked for special treatment. She has never demanded that the league center itself around her. She shows up, plays basketball at an incredibly high level, and handles the media circus with a combination of competitiveness, humor, and grace that makes her even more likable. But her fans have made her the center. And the WNBA has to figure out how to handle that without destroying either what it was or what it is becoming. So where does this go? In the short term, Clark's back injury from June 25th means she could miss the Saturday game against the Los Angeles Sparks. Coach Stephanie White said, "She's okay. She's going to be out on Saturday." The Fever had an off week coming up, which means Clark could potentially miss only one game before getting treatment and getting healthy.
But the fans are angry right now.
Right now, today. And whether Clark misses one game or 5 or 10, the anger that built up over the past week, the punch to the throat, the no call, the one-game suspension, the second game of rough play, the back injury, the 30th anniversary poster, all of that is not going away. The movement is organized. It has hashtags. It has momentum. It has the attention of sports media. It has the attention of TV executives who have to justify their WNBA viewership numbers to advertisers. The WNBA leadership has to make a choice. They can dismiss the boycott threat as overblown. They can point to the overall growth of the league, the expanded season, the new TV deal, the expansion teams, and say that everything is fine, that 1 week of bad headlines doesn't change the trajectory. They can trust that Clark's fans will come back, that anger fades, that sports have a way of moving on. Or they can do something real, something substantive. Something that sends a clear message to Clark's fans that the league hears them, that it takes the protection of its most valuable player seriously, that it is going to change how it handles these situations. Maybe that means clearer, stronger protocols for flagrant fouls and suspensions. Maybe it means publicly addressing the officiating consistency concerns that have been raised not just by fans, but by Clark's own head coach. Maybe it means being proactive rather than reactive, getting ahead of the controversy rather than always scrambling to respond after the fact. The WNBA has a golden goose. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal, precise economic reality. One player who is personally responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, for millions of new fans, for the kind of cultural moment that sports leagues spend decades desperately trying to manufacture. What happens to that golden goose matters. Not just to her fans. To every player in the WNBA. To everyone who depends on the league's financial health. To every coach, every staffer, every arena worker, every executive, every broadcaster. The Bud Light comparison that Caitlin Clark's fans are making is not just rhetoric. It's a warning. And it's a warning with real mathematical weight behind it. The difference between the Bud Light boycott and this one is this. Bud Light had no say in whether Dylan Mulvaney was important to the brand. The partnership was made, the backlash happened, and there was no way to undo it. The WNBA does have a say. It can act. It can make changes. It can demonstrate through its actions, not just its words, that it understands what it has and what it stands to lose. Whether it will, that remains to be seen. Through all of this, the anger, the boycott threats, the culture war politics, the financial negotiations, the media frenzy, the debates about race and gender and sports and America, there is a 24-year-old woman from Des Moines, Iowa, who just wants to play basketball. Caitlin Clark didn't start any of this. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't ask to be the subject of congressional resolutions or trading card auctions or cultural battlegrounds or billion-dollar economic impact analyses. She asked to play basketball. And she does it better than almost anyone who has ever lived. She steps on the floor, and she sees the game differently. She sees passing lanes that aren't there yet. She sees defenders rotating before they've decided to rotate. She sees 30 feet to the basket as a reasonable distance to attempt a shot. And she fires it with that beautiful, effortless, absolutely devastating release. And somehow, improbably, infuriatingly, it goes in. Again and again and again. She walks into arenas, and they sell out. She appears on television and millions of people tune in. She signs trading cards, and they sell for $660,000. She gets technical fouls for clapping, and the entire internet loses its mind. She has done what almost no athlete in the modern era has been able to do. She has made people care who didn't care before. She has made women's basketball appointment television for audiences who had never watched a single professional women's game. She has created genuine excitement, genuine community, genuine passion around a sport and a league that has been fighting for decades to earn the attention it always deserved. And right now, the fans who love her are angry. They're angry because they feel like the institution that benefits most from her is not doing enough to protect her, to honor her, to treat the gift they have been given with the seriousness and respect it deserves. Whether that anger turns into something that truly shakes the WNBA the way Bud Light was shaken depends on what happens next, on whether the league acts or waits, on whether the fans follow through or move on whether Caitlin Clark, who has said nothing to suggest she plans to go anywhere, who has shown up and played and competed with a ferocity and joy that is genuinely beautiful to watch, keeps doing what she does, which, based on everything we've seen, she absolutely will, because that's who she is. She's the girl from Des Moines who broke Pete Maravich's record, who made the Iowa Hawkeyes must-watch television for the whole country, who walked into the WNBA as a 22-year-old rookie and immediately generated $875 million in economic impact, who gets punched in the throat, walks off the floor hurting, and comes back next game ready to compete. She is not going anywhere. The question is whether the league that needs her so desperately is smart enough to realize, once and for all, what they have before they're forced to learn that lesson the hard way. The Bud Light executives probably thought their brand was too big, too established, too American to be seriously damaged by one controversy. They found out otherwise. The WNBA would be wise to study that lesson very, very carefully, because the fans watching this story unfold are doing exactly that. And they are ready.